Could you walk past a silent kennel on Christmas Eve in New York and ignore a puppy who has stopped crying because no one ever answered him? By the time I saw that 2-month-old black German Shepherd puppy in a Brooklyn shelter, he wasn't barking or whining like the others. He just stared at the door as if he was still waiting for the one person who promised to come back. Outside, Brooklyn was loud with car horns, cartwheels, and Christmas music leaking from store speakers. People rushing past the windows with bright bags and tired faces. Inside the city shelter, it felt like a different planet. Bleach, metal, the hum of old heaters just barely keeping the cold from biting through the concrete. I had signed up to cover a volunteer shift just for the holidays, the kind of favor you agree to when you think it'll be simple, in and out, help a few dogs, go home. The moment I stepped into the kennel row, the noise hit me like a wall. Every cage seemed to explode at once. Paws on metal, nails scraping, high-pitched barks, desperate whining, everyone trying to be louder than the dog next to them. Most people freeze when they walk in here for the first time, but after a while you learn to breathe through it, to look past the chaos and try to see individual faces. Today, though, my eyes went straight to the one place where there was no sound at all. At the very end of the row, half lost in shadow, was a small black shape pressed into the back corner of a kennel. No jumping, no scratching, no barking, just that tiny body trembling. Ears slightly folded, eyes fixed on the door at the far end of the hallway like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. His food bowl was almost full, the water untouched, and even when I knelt down and said a quiet, "Hey, buddy," he didn't move toward me. He just kept staring past my shoulder at the entrance, like he was still hoping a familiar pair of footsteps might echo down the hall. I took a slow step closer, then Yishoadin, until my palce lightly wrapped around the cold bars in front of his cage, and all the other dogs around us erupted into fresh barking as they noticed me standing there. In that sudden storm of sound, the little black pup finally closed his eyes and let out one tiny broken squeak, not loud enough to compete with anyone else, just soft enough to sound like someone had failed to come for him one more time. That tiny sound stuck with me longer than any of the barking. It was the kind of noise you hear once and then keep replaying in your head later when everything finally gets quiet. I didn't come to the shelter around Christmas because I love the holidays. If anything, they've stopped making sense to me over the last few years. Too many loud rooms, too many people pretending they're okay because there's tinsel on the wall. Here, with concrete floors and metal doors, I at least know what I'm walking into. When I was a kid, we had a shepherd who used to lie by the front door every night until my dad got home. She'd whine under her breath if he was late, just a soft, worried sound pressed into the crack of the door. I remember lying on the floor next to her, listening to that sound and thinking it was the saddest noise in the world. Standing in front of that kennel in Brooklyn, I realized I'd been wrong. One of the staff walked by with a mop and nodded toward the cage. "That one almost never barks," she said, keeping her voice low out of habit. "Sometimes, when we turn the lights off, he'll let out these tiny whimpers like he's talking to somebody who isn't here anymore." She moved on, and the little German Shepherd puppy kept his eyes on the entrance like she hadn't spoken at all. Every time the heavy front door opened at the far end of the hallway, he reacted the same way. His ears twitched, his head lifted, his eyes sharpened, but he didn't rush the gate like the others. He just sat up straighter and stared, as if he had a very specific pair of shoes he was waiting to recognize. When it wasn't them, his shoulders sank and he folded back into the corner. It took me a minute to notice the kennel right next to his. An older dog lay there, gray around the muzzle, eyes cloudy but awake, body curled tight against the divider. They weren't touching, not really, but the space between their cages felt thinner than the rest of the metal in that room. I told myself I should move on and check the other runs, spread my attention around like a responsible volunteer. I took a step away, then glanced back one more time. The puppy shifted on his thin blanket, nudged it with his nose, and dragged the edge of it across the floor until it was resting right up against the bars between him and the old dog. The days started to slide past in that dull, fluorescent way shelters have. The big calendar by the office door still showed December 22 in red marker, then 23. And everyone kept talking about getting through the rush before Christmas Eve. Families came in with puffy coats and coffee cups, kids bouncing ahead of them, faces pressed to the glass as they walked down the rows. Little fluffy puppies with cream coats and blue bandanas were the first to go, carried out in new collars like wrapped gifts that had finally been opened. Every time footsteps came toward his kennel, the black German Shepherd puppy lifted his head. When it was children, his ears went up a little higher, and his eyes followed them like he recognized their size, their laughter, the way they moved. But he still didn't throw himself at the gate like the others. He sat up straight, long legs tucked in, chest lifted like someone had once taught him to be a good boy by staying calm and waiting for a cue that never came. One boy in a green coat stopped right in front of his cage and stared back at him. The pup held that quiet posture, tail still, eyes locked, almost proud. Then the boy's father tugged his sleeve. "He'll get too big," the man said, not even lowering his voice. "It's a shepherd. We need something easier." They moved on to a smaller dog that spun in circles, and the pup's gaze went back to the entrance, as if that door was still the only one that mattered. Later, while I was refilling buckets, one of the staff leaned in close so the visitors wouldn't hear. "We're over capacity," she murmured. "After the holidays, some of them will have to be moved on." She didn't say moved where. She didn't need to. That night, I stayed later than I meant to, sweeping the same patch of floor just to delay walking out. Most of the dogs finally settled, the noise fading into heavy breathing and the occasional restless shuffle. From the far end of the row, I heard a sound so soft I almost thought I imagined it, a thin, trembling whine coming from his kennel. He wasn't awake, just twitching in his sleep, mouth barely open, letting out these tiny broken notes that rose and fell like he was quietly calling out a last name he was afraid he'd forget. Some dogs shout their needs at you. This one made me lean in and listen. Over the next couple of days, I found myself drifting back to his kennel first, like there was a string from that corner of the room tied to my chest. I'd crouch down in front of the bars and talk to him the way you talk to someone half asleep on a long train ride. I told him how the streets outside were wrapped in lights, how Brooklyn brownstones had fake snow on their steps even though the real stuff hadn't stuck yet. I described window displays he'd never see, plastic reindeer, inflatable Santas, kids dragging parents toward toy stores. He listened the way only a scared puppy can listen, eyes wide, body still, like every word might change what happened next. One afternoon, the barking in the room started to climb again, sharp and frantic, and I pulled my phone out just to give my brain something softer to hold on to. I scrolled to an old Christmas playlist and let a song play low by my leg, the speaker barely louder than the heater's hum. When the singer reached the line, "I'll be home for Christmas," I saw his ears flick. For the first time, that 2-month-old black German Shepherd puppy lifted himself off the blanket and stepped toward me on his own. He placed one small paw against the metal like he was testing if I was real, and his eyes locked onto mine, steady and searching. In that look, there was nothing about toys or treats or bigger bowls. It was one quiet question. Do I ever get a person again, or is this it? A staff member noticed me parked there and handed me his intake card through the bars. "Owner surrender," it read. "Personal reasons." The last name was blacked out with a marker, age listed as approx, 2 months, and under name, someone had just written a dash. I stared at that empty space where a name should have been and felt something tighten in my throat. "Kid," I whispered, barely loud enough for him to hear over the music, "what did you wish for this Christmas?" Right then, the old gray dog in the next kennel hauled himself up, shuffled over, and laid his muzzle against the same strip of metal where the puppy's paw was pressed, like he was part of that wish, whether we understood it or not. After a while, I realized I wasn't just watching one dog. Every time I walked toward that little black kennel, the old gray dog next door started to move too. He had a thin, worn blanket in his run, the kind that had seen too many wash cycles. Whenever I crouched in front of the German Shepherd puppy, that old dog would drag his blanket closer to the shared divider, inch by inch. He'd stop only when the edge of the fabric bunched up against the bars between them. like he was pushing his comfort as far as it could possibly go. The puppy seemed to answer in his own way. He didn't press his nose through the front like the others, begging for hands. Most of the time he lay sideways, his back flat against the wall that separated him from the senior dog, eyes facing the hallway, but body anchored to that warm shape he couldn't quite touch. It felt less like he was scared of people and more like he just refused to lose contact with the one living thing he trusted. One afternoon, a tech caught me staring at the two of them and gave a small, tired smile. "They came in together," she said. "Same transport van, same family dropped them off." She shrugged, the kind of shrug you learn when you've run out of excuses for other people's choices. "We split them up when they got here. Different ages, different chances at getting out." She told me the puppy had screamed for nights when they first separated them. Then, one day, the crying just stopped. He turned into this quiet little shadow who only sometimes nudged his bedding into the crack between the kennels, like he was still trying to build a bridge. It hit me slowly that his silent Christmas wish might not just be to leave this place. It might be the terror of leaving it alone. That evening, when the lights went low and the last visitors were gone, I watched him turn his thin blanket sideways, push it carefully toward the divider, and lie down so that the very tip of his tail rested against the bars, just close enough for the old dog on the other side to feel him there. On the evening of December 23rd, the air in the hallway felt heavier than usual. Staff clustered near the whiteboard, talking over intake numbers and adoption holds while the dogs behind them barked into the void. I was changing water bowls when I heard one of them say, almost casually, "The puppy in the back run will be easier to place after the holidays. If someone takes him tomorrow, at least the old guy next to him will have a little more space." It was said like a practical thing, a puzzle piece sliding into place. But it landed in my chest like a brick. I looked down the row at that small black shape in the corner and the tired gray body pressed against the divider, and suddenly space sounded a lot like time running out. I hadn't walked into this building planning to adopt anyone. I live alone in a one-bedroom walk-up where the walls are thin and the neighbors complain if you sneeze too loud. A growing German Shepherd puppy is not exactly a low-maintenance roommate. Food, vet bills, training, long walks in the snow when everyone else is warm at home. I could see the whole list of reasons not to do this scrolling in my head. But then I looked back at him, trying so hard to look composed in a world that had taken everything familiar away. And I looked at the old dog, who barely stood up anymore unless the puppy moved first. Between them, there was this quiet line of loyalty I couldn't unsee. I found myself asking for an adoption form before I'd fully decided to. Sat down at the chipped metal desk, grumbling under my breath, telling myself it would just be a holiday foster, a little borrowed time for a dog who deserved better than a concrete floor for Christmas. My hands still shook a little when I signed my name at the bottom. When I finally looked up from the paperwork, he was no longer curled in the back. That 2-month-old black German Shepherd puppy was standing right at the front of the kennel, tail trembling in a small, uncertain wag. But his eyes weren't on me. They were fixed, steady, and worried on the old dog in the next run. Christmas Eve morning in Brooklyn always feels a little hungover, even when no one's had anything to drink yet. The streets were pale and quiet, a light dusting of snow stuck to parked cars, and the bus I rode in on was almost empty. Just me and a couple of people hugging paper cups like they'd fall apart without caffeine. I watched the city slide past the fogged-up window and tried not to think too hard about what I was doing. Adopting a 2-month-old black German Shepherd puppy out of a shelter was the kind of decision people make after family meetings and budget talks, not on the back of a volunteer shift. But my feet still carried me off the bus, down the block, and through the glass doors of the shelter, like they'd already made peace with it before my head had. Inside, it was quieter than usual. No school field trips, no lines at the front desk, just a couple of staff members in Christmas-themed scrub tops moving through their routines. Someone nodded at me, disappeared down the hall, and came back with him on a thin red leash. He looked even smaller out of the kennel, all legs and ribs and 2 big paws, the leash clip almost comically heavy on his collar. His body shook, not from the cold, but from the kind of confusion that lives in a dog who has had too many doors close behind him. The noise from the other runs picked up as we stepped into the main aisle, barks bouncing off concrete, claws rattling metal, but he kept glancing over his shoulder instead of looking at the exit. We started toward the front, one careful step at a time. At first he followed, head low, ears pinned back. Then, halfway down the hallway, his nails scraped against the floor and he froze, every muscle locking at once. He dug his tiny claws into the grooves of the concrete like he was trying to hook himself into the building and stay. I eased up on the leash, crouched beside him, murmured something soft I don't even remember now. He turned his head, not toward the door and not toward me, but toward the corridor that led back to his old kennel row. When I tried to coax him forward again, he leaned his whole weight in the opposite direction, small body pulling, his eyes fixed down that hallway like there was something back there he refused to leave behind. One of the staff watched us from the desk, arms folded, expression sad in a way you only see in people who've done this too long. "He keeps doing that every time someone tries to take him out alone," she said quietly. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding and loosened my grip on the leash. "All right," I said softly. "Let's go show me what you're so worried about." We turned away from the lobby and headed back toward the kennels. This time the little German Shepherd puppy didn't drag his feet. He almost trotted beside me, ears forward, nails clicking faster on the concrete as we got closer to the row where he'd spent his nights. When we reached his old section, he stopped right between the two runs. On one side, his kennel sat open and empty, blanket rumpled, bowl already pulled for cleaning. On the other, the senior dog lay curled tight, breathing slow and shallow. The pup positioned himself with his tail pointed toward his own vacant cage, and his face turned fully to the old dog, like he was choosing where he belonged. Then he lifted his head and let out a sound I hadn't heard from him awake. It wasn't a sharp bark or a panicked scream. It was a long, low, aching howl that seemed to start in his chest and drag all the way up his throat, stretching out into the space between them. If it had words, it would have been one simple question. "He's coming too, right?" A staff member had followed us down, leaning on the end of a mop handle as she watched. "The night they came in," she said quietly, "he wouldn't sleep unless he was pressed up against the old guy. Puppy pretty much lay on top of him, keeping him warm." She shook her head. When we split the kennels, he screamed until his voice started to go. Then one morning, he just stopped, got quiet like this. I looked at the pup, at the way his whole body angled toward that gray muzzle on the other side of the bars, and the thought came whether I wanted it or not. Maybe his Christmas wish isn't just to get out. Maybe what scares him to death is getting out and leaving someone behind. The old dog struggled to his feet, joints stiff, and shuffled forward until his nose touched the metal. He pushed his muzzle through as far as it would go, gently bumping it against the puppy's face, like a tired parent checking that their kid made it home. The staff member's voice dropped even lower, almost apologetic. "Nobody's going to adopt that old boy on Christmas," she murmured. "We're just trying to make his last days as easy as we can." The hallway felt even colder once we stepped away from the kennels. I scooped him up for a minute, more for his sake than mine, and he folded into my arms like he'd done it 100 times before. His chest pressed against my jacket, warm and fast, but his head kept twisting back over my shoulder, eyes searching the direction we'd just come from. My brain was doing laps while my feet moved toward the exit. Money was already tight, and a growing German Shepherd puppy doesn't exactly come with a discount maintenance plan. My apartment is small, my building has rules about noise, and I'm not 20 anymore, running stairs for fun. Taking on a young, high-energy dog is a commitment all by itself. Taking him on while that old soul back there lies on a concrete floor feels like a test. I'm not sure I'm brave enough to pass. Somewhere between the kennels and the front desk, a memory I hadn't visited in years elbowed its way in. My family once left our senior dog with friends just for a while when things got complicated. We dropped her off with extra food and promises to visit soon. She died there without ever coming back home. I was just a kid, but I remember standing in an empty doorway, promising myself I would never be the one to walk away from an old dog like that again. The puppy shifted in my arms, like he could hear that promise echoing around my ribs. He stopped craning his neck toward the kennels and instead rested his head on my shoulder, so light I barely felt the weight, and so heavy I could hardly breathe. If that look had a sentence, it was simple. Don't do to me what someone already did to him. Right there in the middle of that drafty hallway, I understood his real Christmas wish. It wasn't a fancy bed or a pile of toys. He just didn't want to be the last one to leave that row. I turned around before I could talk myself out of it and carried him back toward the desk. My voice came out rough when I said, "What if we try something different?" The words came out before I could pull them back. "Put them on the same form," I said. "I'm not walking out of here with half a family." For a second, the whole front desk went quiet. Two staff members looked at each other like they were waiting for the punchline. Then the explanations started. Apartment size, energy levels, medical costs, what it means to take home a senior and a young German Shepherd puppy at the same time. I listened to every warning and still heard that low, aching howl from the kennel row louder than all of it. We settled on a compromise. Full adoption for the puppy, medical foster for the old boy with the option to keep him if it worked out. It sounded like a legal way to write down what my gut had already decided. I signed more papers with a hand that didn't feel like mine. When we walked back to the kennels, the pup was pacing in his run, nose pressed to the divider. The moment the latch on the senior dog's door clicked, he spun around. As the kennel opened and that gray body shuffled forward, the little guy let out his first real bark, sharp, bright, like a firework going off in a silent sky. They stepped into the hallway together. The old dog leaned his weight into my leg, ribs bony under my hand. The puppy circled him in tight loops, bumping his nose against the older dog's shoulder every few steps, as if to make sure he was still there, still coming, still part of this escape. This was his Christmas wish, laid out on dirty concrete. Not a toy, not a fancy bed, just the right to leave this place side by side. In the car, they collapsed on the back seat, pressed so tightly together you couldn't see where the old dog ended and the puppy began. I looked at that tiny black nose resting on a graying paw and sighed. If you're getting your Christmas wish, kid, you need a name. His ears twitched at the word wish, like he recognized it from somewhere only he remembered. All right, I whispered. We'll call you Wish. The days after Christmas slid by in a soft blur of paws on hardwood and slow, steady breathing. My quiet Brooklyn apartment, the one that used to echo when I dropped my keys, suddenly had the sound of nails clicking down the hallway and an old dog's sigh settling into the corners. Wish explored everything cautiously at first, sniffing each doorway like it might disappear if he blinked. I started saying their names out loud so the walls could get used to them. The puppy was Wish now, the little black shadow who dared to want more than a cage for Christmas. The old boy became Harbor, because that's what he felt like the moment he relaxed against the back seat of my car. A place where someone small could finally come in from the storm. Wish had to figure out what it meant to live inside four walls that belonged to him. The elevator terrified him on day one. He tried to back out when the doors closed, then hid his face against my leg until they opened again. The first time he stepped onto my creaking floorboards, he froze, ears up, as if the apartment itself was talking back to him. At night, he'd hop onto Harbor's bed, curl into the leftover space, and pretend not to notice that it obviously wasn't designed for two. Harbor changed, too. Once the heat in the building soaked into his old bones and he realized no one was coming to move him again, the shaking in his legs eased. He stopped startling at every hallway noise and started sleeping deeper, chin on his paws, one eye half open to keep track of Wish. And Wish finally slept without jerking awake every time a pipe rattled or a car door slammed outside. One evening, I found myself dragging a small, cheap, artificial tree out of a closet, something I hadn't bothered with in years. I set it up by the window and tucked a couple of bargain bin dog toys underneath. Nothing fancy, just enough to make the room feel like it matched the warmth already lying on my living room rug. Listening to them breathe in sync, watching Wish rest his head across Harbor's back like it was the most natural pillow in the world, I caught myself saying out loud, almost to the dark window more than to them, I thought I was rescuing a puppy for Christmas. Turns out, He was the one who refused to let me rescue just half a heart. Some nights now, when the city finally quiets down and the radiator ticks in the dark, I'll look over and sesh Wish asleep with his head draped across Harbor's chest, both of them dreaming like they've forgotten Crete feels like. The puppy who once shook in the back of a kennel now runs the length of my hallway with toys in his mouth, then always circles back to make sure the old dog is still right behind him. You don't know me, but my name is Ray, and I'm just one man in one small apartment in Brooklyn. But every time I watch Wish nudge Harbor to the softer part of the bed, or see Harbor steady himself so the brave pup can lean against him on the stairs, I'm reminded how close we came to only saving half this story. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. They were the ones who took him in when someone decided he was too much. They were the ones who kept Harbor warm long enough for a scared, stubborn volunteer to walk in and finally listen to one quiet Christmas wish. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility. It's pet care. It's the vet bills, the late-night walks, the patience on the days when fear shows up louder than training. And it's also the way your own chest loosens when you realize you're not just saving a dog, you're letting a dog save something in you too. If you're still here, listening to Wish's story all the way to the end, you've already done more than you think. You let his silent cry reach you. But there's another puppy tonight staring at a shelter door, another old dog pressing his back against a cold wall, hoping somebody will hear the wish they're too tired to voice out loud. Maybe you can be the one who walks into your local shelter and asks about the dog nobody else is looking at. Maybe you can foster or donate or bring blankets or just share their stories so the right eyes finally see them. Every time you like, comment, and share a story like Wish and Harbor's, you push it in front of someone who might be one decision away from opening their front door to a dog who's almost out of time. Thank you for staying with us, for letting brave Paws sit with you in these hard, beautiful moments. Thank you for caring enough to feel this, for letting their journey into your living room and your heart. This little guy's Christmas wish was never about a perfect tree or a shiny toy. It was about not having to walk out of that place alone. Join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice. Be their hope.